He's been called a one-man flash mob because his stage performances as a comedian, singer, or the host of sing-along screenings of Sound of Music or Grease is pure energy. But offstage, it's a different story. Shawn Hitchins tells all, really, in his new book, A Brief History of Oversharing, on Ginger's Anthology of Humiliation. And we're pleased he's with us tonight. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Your memoir reads like a screenplay. I laughed, I cried, and I laughed again.
Yeah.
But to start the conversation, I have a very serious Bridget Jones-like question to ask you first.
Okay.
When you are invited to a barbecue, what goes through your mind?
Okay. I am not easy to go to a summer barbecue because I can't go really in the sun. And so there's a process and there's a timeline that starts with like finding a shady path to go. I have to, I just end up entering like a gay scarecrow. Like I'm just got this hat that's unflattering, a UV suit. I'm soaked, I'm greasy from the sunscreen. I just never show up glamorous.
Glamorous, yeah. You still get invited to barbecues?
Every now and then.
Every now and then.
I have friends that will invite me to a patio, but they will preface, there's no shade.
But you do this because of a very serious thing, right?
Yeah. I am prone to melanoma. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it is a part of my regiment is being the 6-month mold checks, which
you describe in detail. Can you describe it just a little bit for us?
Okay. Okay. So the mold checks, I have these like photos that are like of a younger, twinkier me, and I'm really trying to be really sort of like, when someone says we're going to take nude photos of you, you're like, okay. But then you go to like this medical studio and it's like going to Service Ontario, but you take off your clothes. And so the photos, like I would be completely devastated if they were released. Not because they're like not safe for work, but just because they're so pathetic. Like it's like the type of thing if like Costco like came out with like a porn magazine, it would be like this. Like they're just like sulky poses because they're like, you know, trying to map the layers of my skin. So my doctor takes them and then he compares them with now. And it's
Well, now you have a collection of nudes that you can look at in your later years.
Yes.
And you can think, wow, I didn't look so bad back then.
But I didn't look that great.
But being a ginger is not just a genetic fact for you. It's also become a part of your stand-up as a comedian.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some experts from your show, not surprisingly entitled Ginger Nation.
I'm a minority. 1% of the world's population has red hair, which I do. 4% of that 1% have beautiful baby blue eyes, which I do. And 1% of that 4% are homosexuals, which I do. I have never had sex with a woman. Legend says that I was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, and I worked it like a boa. It's not easy for gay men to have a baby. No matter how hard we try with one another, it never results in a pregnancy.
Well, I want to talk about the pregnancy later because you do have a child.
I do.
But let's start talking about being a minority.
Okay.
You say that gingers are subject to prejudices.
Yes.
Gingerism, you call it.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, gingerism, it is something that sounds ridiculous, and I would never compare it to systemic racism, but in the UK, kids are bullied for having red hair in ways that are their entire families that are displaced for having they're kicked out of their communities. Kids are beat up, and it was when I was on the streets of Edinburgh, like flyering for my show, and I was targeting redheads because I needed to get people in my.
You were there for the Fringe Festival?
Yeah, in 2011 and then 2013, and what was interesting is that I would have these conversations with redheads that I would never have in North America. It was really shocking, like even some of the conversations like from young teenage girls who would say, I don't want to have a child because I don't want it to have red hair, because my mother had red hair and she went through like brutal bullying. And it's this weird thing.
Where does it come from?
It's, so in my, I have.
I mean, you're the ginger expert.
Well, yeah. But what I've sort of whittled it down to is this idea of like when the Irish came into the UK, and there was this. It's about class. It's about being different, and it's systemic, it's historical, and it actually does exist. It doesn't really exist in Canada. I mean, kids are bullied, not so much for having red hair, because our idea of redheads in North American culture is Lucille Ball, Ron Howard, you know,
Anne of Green Gables.
Anne of Green Gables. And so we have sort of this sort of friendlier idea, but in the UK it's very different.
Do women and men get treated differently? Or is it the same?
I think men actually, I don't know. I don't want to, I wouldn't want to put a tack on it, but I would say that young redhead boys are bullied.
Even though Prince Harry is around?
Well, see, then there's this turn, right? Like there's this, and I think what happened when I did this Ginger Pride March, or Ginger Pride Walk, it sort of just caught onto this tale, like of sort of like Prince Harry, and he's an attractive redhead, and then there was this a photographer named Thomas, forget his last name, I'll remember it later, but he was doing these sort of portraits of redheaded males, but in a hypersexual way. And I just came in there with a tweet saying, I'm gonna march, you know, hundreds of redheads to the streets of Edinburgh, and that's when it sort of exploded.
So this whole thing, it just started with you tweeting about it, and then everybody picked it up.
Yeah, it went, so by the time I landed in Scotland, from the tweet in the Eaton Centre when I was trying to find a travel bag, to the time I landed a week and a half later in Scotland, I walked into a Virgin Mobile to get a SIM card, and the guy behind the counter turned and looked at me and said, "You're the man who's come here to save the gingers." And I was just like, what do you mean? And he opened up the paper, and there was a 2-page spread.
And you did this because the first year you went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, you kind of bombed.
Oh, I bombed.
You bombed, and you spent a lot of money.
Yeah.
So the next year you were like, when I go, I'm going to go big.
I'm going to go so big they can't ignore me.
Okay, let's take a clip of the march, and then we'll talk more about it. Here's a clip.
The streets of Edinburgh turned a very lovely shade of red yesterday as more than 100 people with ginger hair walked through the city centre. They were taking part in the UK's first event to show their pride to be ginger. Marchers carried signs with messages such as "For the love of ginger," "All hail the red, orange and pale," as well as "Ginger and proud."
Now, you did all that.
I did.
Especially considering how people with red hair are treated over there.
Yeah.
For you, it might have just started as something for you to get a bigger audience, but it actually had like impact for people living there.
It did.
What was that like when you realized that, oh wow, this is actually a really positive thing for me to do?
Well, I think this is a reoccurring theme in my life, because a lot of things start off as jokes, and doing something for a joke or something for like, you know, maybe for the story, a little bit of a irreverent nature there. And then there's a point when the joke turns into reality, and you're dealing with actual people's lives and their emotions. And it wasn't until I was on the streets talking to, it was after a show. It was after a show, and this man who was at the parade came up to me, and he's like 40, he's balding, he doesn't have his red hair anymore, and he was just bawling. And I was just like, oh, my show really affected you that much. And he said, no, it was the march. And I was like, he's like, I was bullied so bad, I never wanted to have red hair.
You saw him.
Yeah.
And growing up, you struggled with people seeing who you were.
Yeah.
So you grew up in a town called Egypt, Ontario,
Yeah.
which I don't want to admit on television, but I actually never heard of it until I read your book.
Yeah. It's a wonderful intersection.
It's an intersection, Smith Boulevard and Park Road, right?
Yeah. You did your research.
Well, I read the book. Where is it, and what was the place like?
It was really kind of magical because it was nothing. It was my grandfather's farm, his brother's farm, and then generations of cousins, and a town hall and a church that none of us really went to, and my house, my family house, and it was just sort of, it was a really strong knit community, and it was all centered around this community hall, and you know, it was sort of Rockwellian. In the way that we had hay wagon rides and corn roasts and a baseball field cut into a cornfield, like it was Field of Dreams. And but it was very sort of, you're either inside or you're outside. And so I felt inside for a long time, and I was really buying into it. And then all of a sudden my sexuality started blossoming, and that's when conflict started.
You write, you don't go to my mother looking to be coddled, and she was your biggest ally.
Yeah, she still is.
She still is, and
Yeah.
she supported you in everything, and she saw you without you having to say anything.
Yeah.
So she was tough, but kind?
Oh, she's definitely kind. I think I don't know if she's tough. I think she's just maybe a bit stoic in the way that, you know, so I guess there's a toughness there. There's a farmer, you know, like, it wasn't a go without, but it was just, you know, we have what we have and we should be happy.
And you dedicated the book to two men.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Harrison Ford for making me gay, because he did.
Understandable.
And then to my father for making me a comedian.
You and your dad had a really difficult relationship. I mean, it's an understatement, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's a very complicated relationship, and
there's that scene in the book when he walks in on you and you're wearing the dress, the heels, and the blush.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And everything that transpired after.
Yeah.
But I also feel, so what was that like, looking back on that?
It's funny because the book for me is sort of like a life audit. And because the last couple of years, like, you know, I feel like in the middle of my 30s, I sort of went through this, I'm going through this second adolescence where there was so much change. And so I tried to parallel what I was experiencing now, where I was all of a sudden like feeling unanchored and like everything was like falling down around me. And I tried to remember that last time that happened. And that was the ages of 13 to 17. And so when I look back at that moment, I don't have a lot of pain about it. I have like, I kind of look at it as an inciting force. Like if there was one day that I could go back and sort of try to fix, because that moment just sort of created the next 17 years.
Looking back at that moment, was there, I mean, you were really young, but is there a moment where you were kind of just relieved that like, it wasn't a secret anymore?
No, because it was still very much a secret until, well, it wasn't a secret. I never hid who I was.
Because you never came out or anything.
I never came out. Like, I never had that moment. My parents, it was attrition. Like, I was just like, I'm going to put this in your face until you can't handle it anymore. And so, you know, we did have a breaking moment, and I think it's that weird thing that happened in the 90s with gay kids coming out, you know, before Ellen, before Will and Grace, you know, now there's coming out parties and things like that. We didn't have that.
And you were in a small town.
Small town. We were coming out at the tail end of the AIDS crisis. I mean, it still continues, but they didn't. There wasn't that. There wasn't that acceptance. That general, like, it's okay. I mean, I know many kids whose lives were ruined because they were just simply rejected by their families.
You don't want, in the book, you write, you know, I don't want the world to see him as, you know, you have a lot of compassion for your father.
I do.
Despite the way he treated you. Why?
Because I think circumstance, when you weigh circumstance, when you see how he was treated, how he maybe didn't have the tools to be a father. He's an excellent provider. He's incredibly skilled at his work. People really like him. And and it's this thing in my family that we still try to feel like, what is this force that keeps us apart? It's like a magnetic field with like two north ends like facing each other. It's just like, you want to be close, but there's something that repels you. And I think part of if I had like a life journey, or I think it's something I don't think our relationship is finished. And so part of me, and why I always write my experience and try not to impose so much of his experience or hearsay, is to start a conversation.
You also write that about the importance of humor.
Yeah.
You write, only by laughing at our situation were we given permission to express our profound dissatisfaction, to show vulnerability, or to admit fear.
Yeah.
Is that what gave you your early training for becoming a comedian?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think humor in my, I'm going to call it in Egypt or in my family, it was a survival skill, you know?
So when you had like an uncomfortable moment.
You just got to laugh at it. Yeah. I mean, I can't say our family motto. Or there's a
What is your family motto?
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, that joke of, you know, a common reaction would be like, if you can't laugh at life shit, then go kill yourself. You know, like that's how my family reacts.
Within all of this, you develop like an affinity for Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that bizarre?
It's so weird.
Yeah.
I mean, not weird. I'm not judging.
No, tell me, please judge. I mean, that's why I wrote the book.
What was it about her that made you crazy for her?
I think it was just, well, it started with Jumping Jack Flash for me. Like that movie was so amazing. You know, it was also like the going from just an antenna, just like an antenna on a TV, like rabbit ears, and getting like three stations, like CKVR in Barrie, in which ran like Andy of Mayberry and Lucille Ball, the I Love Lucy show. And all of a sudden, we had like different families and people who looked different than everybody that I met. And I started identifying with that. I started seeing Whoopi Goldberg and remember 227.
Oh my God, I love 227.
Yeah. Jack Hay. Yeah. and so I call them early portholes. Because they were portholes to an alternate universe. Like, and I would, you know, and I learned about gay people or being gay from like the weirdest sources, like Jerry Springer.
Right.
You know, because you would see gay men on Jerry Springer and you'd go, oh.
Who knew Jerry Springer could do some good?
I know, but like, isn't that bizarre?
Yeah.
Like how your world is shaped, and I don't know what exactly it is about Whoopi Goldberg. I know what it was about Whitney Houston. And
what was it about Whitney?
That voice.
Right.
It was that voice. It was clean. It was powerful. And it just spoke to me of just one of those things. And
so in high school, you had several careers. You write you didn't have hobbies.
I never had.
You had a career.
I rewire lamps now. That's a hobby, but I still sell them. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? You're
a Renaissance man, right?
Yeah.
So in high school, you had a flourishing stage career. Then you left that, and then you started to ice skate.
Yeah.
But then you gave that up. But why did you start ice skating?
Well, it was just
figure skating.
Or figure skating. Yeah. So figure skating happened before. Well, it was at the same time. So like in public school, it was just one of those things where you had like the Calgary, the Lillehammer, and then the other Olympics just back to back. Like it was like a 3 over 6 years, I think it was. And so you saw Kurt Browning, and you saw Elvis Stojko, and you saw Brian Orser. And it was this expression on ice with like pirate shirts and sequins and like backflips and axles, and you're like, yes, I can do that. And so I just was like, I remember the one day, okay, so my parents tried to put me in hockey, didn't go for it. So they put me in this thing, well, they put me in like junior hockey, and they put this dirty penny on me and put me out on the ice and made me like play this game. And I remember walking off the ice with this dirty penny, ripping it off, throwing it at my parents and said, not until they do the laundry. Who does that?
You.
Yeah, I'm not doing that until they do the laundry, and that was it.
And you also went through a phase where you described yourself as a fanatic for musicals.
Yes.
But then that changed. You write that your love for musicals went sour. What happened? Why wasn't it something that you liked anymore?
Because I think that when I started creating my own work, and I started standing up on stage, and I started just talking in my own voice, I sort of had this sort of realization. You know, I had it when I was a drag queen. Like I had a whole I've done everything I feel. Not yet. I still got some things left to do. But it's this idea that I'm still forming in my head about where do gay men fit in the entertainment industry. And part of me I love musical theater. I love it. I don't like it as a form of gay expression, because I feel like when someone writes a musical, the traditional form is gay men writing musicals in a hetero narrative. And then gay men take that narrative and they mine it. And then they take the songs and the ballads and they sort of reappropriate it as their own. And that becomes their voice. And I feel like I'm kind of tired of mining my own narrative. And I would love to have a direct narrative that mirrors my life.
The other chapter that had me like weeping and from laughter and also from sadness is when you were talking about gay men not being able to make children with each other. And you donated your sperm to a couple. And you go through this, I guess, this kind of push and pull, trying to decide whether or not you should be in your biological daughter's life. Tell me about that.
Okay, yeah. Let me start by doing the show. No. Yeah, for me, that realization was, it took me I'm still processing that, what it means to be a father. I feel like that's the through line of the book, because I talk about my father, then my mentorship with director George Bloomfield, and then becoming a father. And for me, it was this idea that cracked in my head that I was not less than, that I was actually physically capable of having a child. And there was this sort of rooted shame in me, which goes back to, that inciting force, that moment when I was 13, that sort of put that in me, that gay men grow up thinking that they're less than everybody else, that there's something physically wrong with them, that there's something emotionally wrong, that we're broken. And it was a long process, and it was a real Oprah aha moment for me to go.
But you called it something else, and F this.
It's that moment when you realize that because who you are, how you were born, you were told that you couldn't do things. You couldn't have kids, and it's a religious, it's a political, it's a social message, it's woven into our narratives. Kids grow up learning, kids have a mom and a dad, and it's a biological thing, and when you come around to it, you're like, I can have kids. I'm very fertile. And it's this moment of where it was realizing that I could have a kid, but realizing I don't want to parent a child.
And that being okay.
Yeah. And what's been really, part of the journey of this show and this book is trying to break that narrative, because every time we hear the story of a sperm donor, we hear it, it's that college joke about, will the gay man sleep with a woman? How does it happen? It's the truth is that you can have a kid. You can choose to parent the child, you can choose not to parent the child, or you could mentor the kid.
Is that your relationship with her?
Yeah, or? And that goes back to my relationship with George Bloomfield, who sort of who was this amazing presence in my life, who basically showed me what mentorship was, what being there for someone was, what being a positive force in someone's life can do. And
you had this beautiful passage when you were talking about him. Yeah. And you wrote that he was the first man that you could sit beside without feeling intimidated or worried about what was going to happen or being afraid of.
Yeah, just to sit beside. And that was 7 years of sitting beside someone on set for long days and just not having to do anything, not having to impress him or worry about his emotional state or how we were it was just calm. And I think that was the first time I've ever experienced that.
You're right. I was raised with an intense sense of belonging and blind sense of comfort that I've desperately tried to regain since I lost it. But normalcy has invaded me at every turn. What would make you feel like you're living a normal life?
I don't know if I want a normal life. I think that's maybe sort of what my journey is. And there's a part in the Ginger Pride Walk where I felt like a sense of community. You know, when I'm on stage with an audience, I feel a sense of community. And it's, for me, trying to identify what those things are, and honoring them, and just sort of marching towards them.
I mentioned at the beginning that it read like a screenplay, and at the end of the book, you actually have who you want to play the different characters. And we've run out of time, but I thought it was so like sweet and funny that you think that, well, you want Tilda Swinton to play you.
Yes, I do. I love her.
She's fantastic.
There's something about her and her sort of androgynous features. Same with David Bowie, that I kind of go, you could play me.
Well, Shawn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
I wish we had another hour to talk about this.
Let's go grab a coffee.
Yeah, right. Great book.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.